How freaking scary is that?
We get it. It sucks. Grief sucks.
Oh no.
Being queer, being trans, there's a lot of heaviness to that, and it's kind of sticks with us, right?
It's okay to feel weird. It's okay to not show up in the ways that you want. It's most important to be your whole full self.
We're going to talk about some things to do as a person who is supporting a person in grief.
This is Don't Make It Weird, how to be there for queer and trans folks through grief. My name is Eli Johnson. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as non-binary, and I'm the behavioral health specialist at Equitas Health in King Lincoln Clinic.
My name's Taylor. I use she, her pronouns. I am one of the behavioral health therapists at Equitas Health. I work at Short North.
Why we're talking about this, there's both professional and personal experiences that brought us both here. So I can only talk for myself, and then I'll give it over to Taylor. But for me, there's the professional experience of watching my clients go through all different kinds of grief, and struggling to affirm themselves, to validate their experiences, and their community and their identities throughout it all. And so watching this is hard, but also watching the support system is even harder, because there's a lot of folks that just don't know what to do and how to be a good ally. Um, the personal side for me is I've also been through grief myself. I've been through I've been the client, and I've also been that support person where I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do. And so we are hoping, at least I'm hoping, to offer a little bit of space to say, it's okay to feel weird. It's okay to not show up in the ways that you want. It's most important to be your whole full self. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. But I think every time I've experienced grief, either with a friend or myself, it's dang nabbit, I just want the actual person. I don't want whatever you're thinking that it should be. Um, and so this is hopefully going to help you or a friend or a family member to make it suck a little less. So that's my personal and professional reason why I'm here. Taylor, it's up to you now.
So good. Thanks, Eli. So yeah, a little bit about what brought me to like this whole grief work talk. Um, Professional and personal too. So professional, I would second Eli, a lot of us, especially just like going through 2020, like a lot of us are just going through stuff. And it's, important to grieve that stuff and be able to be there for others who are grieving. And a little bit like personal side for me, coming out for me was not fun. I was kind of rushed into coming out. Some would say maybe forced out. And that was really hard for me. And I didn't really have supports at that time, especially other folks in the community. So, as I got older, I was kind of realizing I didn't, maybe not like had time to grieve that process and grieve that moment that was somewhat taken from me. So, yeah, just reflecting on that, I thought it's really important for us in the community to just talk about it. And like Eli said, be able to be an ally for those who are grieving. So we're going to move into kind of the body of the program. First, just talking about what is grief and just pointing out that grief is not just death. So it's, about change, growth. It's about transformation from like the start of the process to the end. And going to like define grief a little bit. So like the APA dictionary, fancy, describes grief as the anguish experienced after significant loss, usually the death of a beloved person. Grief is often distinguished from bereavement and mourning. Not all bereavements result in a strong grief response, and not all grief is given public expression, which we'll talk a little bit about what that means later. Grief often includes physiological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsession, dwelling on the past, and apprehension about the future. Intense grief can become life-threatening through disruption of the immune system, self-neglect, and suicidal thoughts. Grief may also take the form of regret for something lost, remorse for something done, or sorrow for a mishap to oneself. So I really like that definition personally because it mentions a lot of the things that make grief so complex. And it also mentions the different types of grief. So, like it said, it's not just death, it's a lot of things that we can experience grief around.
So with that definition and moving forward with it, understanding like, yes, grief is the death of maybe a person, an experience, so whatever, right? Um, it's understanding that like things are changing and this is hard. So not only is it hard for that person experiencing that grief, which I really appreciate that definition for it, similar to Taylor,
Mhm.
but also like as a I'm assuming that many of the folks watching this are folks trying to be an ally to a person going through that grief, right? Um, and so you're probably feeling pretty uncomfy, pretty like vulnerable, like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. So why
Mhm.
is that? Why do I have this icky feeling? And the thing is it's hard and it's vulnerable for not only the person going through that experience, but also for their support systems. To be there for someone means to also be vulnerable and to walk into that darkness that they're experiencing together. How freaking scary is that?
Yeah.
And so, Brene Brown, I am a Brene Brown fan. Uh, if you don't know her, she's a researcher. She's also an author and a social worker. So she researches basically how to be vulnerable and combat shame, guilt, all of these like terrible emotions that we often feel in the face of vulnerability. And so she has a really great quote from her book, Dare to Lead, that is empathy is a choice. It's a vulnerable choice because if we were to choose to connect with you through, if I were to, if I were to choose to connect with you through empathy, I would have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. In the face of a difficult conversation, when we see that someone's hurt or in pain, it's our instinct as humans to make things better. We want to fix. We want to give advice. But empathy isn't about fixing. It's the brave choice to be with someone in their darkness, not to race to turn on the light so we feel better. It's a really important uh, way to distinguish how to help serve this person that's in front of you that's really hurting and going through that grief versus how to self-soothe that, oh my gosh, I feel so vulnerable. I feel so uncomfy. Notice that urge and that flinch to reach for that light when you're in that dark space with a person. What does it look like to sit there and notice what capacity you have for that too?
I love that. I also think it's really cool to like point out that that kind of just reminds us that it's okay to just be with another person in grief, which is often, like the quote said, is not something that our brains go to, but kind of takes the pressure off us. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Um, so queering grief and how is it different? So folks within the LGBTQ community, we have, special things about us and things that make us different. And especially when it comes to mental health, all the things really, it's important for us to recognize those things and call attention. So first off, grief is human. It's what we do. Grief as a queer person can be more difficult due to more barriers in care, support, and resources in and toward our community. With often less biological support, having non-traditional definitions of family, ever-changing political landscapes, um, this all affects us as a marginalized community and puts us at more risk of experiencing what's called disenfranchised grief. So another kind of fancy definition, not really though, I kind of shortened it, Basically, it's just what disenfranchised grief is what happens when we aren't supported or able to openly process the grief that we feel. This can look differently, and here are some examples. So, maybe you broke up with a partner and you tell a family member, whoever, a friend even, and that relationship is kind of minimized because it's queer. Which once it's minimized, it kind of lacks, or we feel that sense of lack of significance. And lack of significance leads to lack of recognition of what that loss means to us because we're getting all these like outside factors, right? Um, and then we can experience guilt, shame around, say, the breakup or maybe a partner passed away. Even, directing it towards ourselves, I deserve this, kind of that punishment aspect, which is not cool. Um, and all of these things are really kind of important to realize and recognize, one, for the person who is grieving, but also to kind of, again, bringing it back to the quote that Eli said, just learning to show up for the person and really recognizing, okay, yeah, this might have been a queer relationship, but this was still a relationship that was important to this person. So what do they need now? Well, probably just for me to maybe sit with them, talk to them, not give answers right away. So, yeah.
I really like the fact that it was that idea of noticing the fact that like grief needs to be seen, grief needs to like
Hmm.
and to be with it, because that disenfranchised grief is serves up a lot of vulnerabilities. Queerness and transness serves up a lot of vulnerabilities. But I also want to kind of flip that on its head and say it's also a gift. And this really has changed. Personally, it changed what I experienced as grief. But it's also a really important note to say, like, being queer and trans isn't like this terrible experience that is thrust upon you. It doesn't have to be, at least. Um, it's a gift of also opting out of what's expected of our lives. Um, we opt out of the heteronormativity of it all. So we make our own blueprint that works for us, queer folks, trans folks, however you identify. There is no real blueprint for us. This is an option for anyone, but it's mostly been an option for queer and trans folks as a default because there is nothing. There is no expectation of when will you get married? When will you have that kid? What about that one house and that one fence? We just we just got the option to legally marry folks of the
Yeah.
same sex. Like, this blueprint is, yes, it's super heteronormative and it's definitely thrust upon us, and we get an option because I have to really think about getting pregnant because there's a lot more steps to this, right? So me as an assigned female at birth person, um I haven't heard other people's expectations for me having kids once it became apparent that I was trans to other folks and they were affirming. Um, I got a lot less questions around like, when is that marriage going to happen? When are those kids going to happen? That like white picket fence. And this is really different from my cis straight friends who are women. Um, it's a really different experience. And so that's one heck of a gift because then I get to define when that happens for me, when that happens for my family, and if I want it. Um, and so, what a freaking gift to build our own families, to build our own health systems like Equitas Health. And what a gift to remember the fact that, like, throughout all of this grief, you have power, you have the ability to change and shift it, um, which is a really important thing to keep in mind as you are helping someone go through something so hard and so heavy.
I love it. It's like a warm hug.
It's so true. The moment I realized this, I was like, "Oh, oh no." Like, it was
Yeah.
just like, it's a big shift and sometimes can feel very trite, um, but it's real. Like, I don't feel the same pressures as my Instagram straight cis,
Mhm.
specifically white folks do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
where, like, I don't have to post about the house that I'm trying to buy, and
Yeah.
that's nice. That's real
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, Eli, I think you were the one that actually kind of told me about this and reframed it for me. And it's like, it's really awesome. And it's hard to kind of get out of that space because tying it back to grief, like being queer, being trans, there's a lot of heaviness to that. And it's kind of sticks with us, right? I mean, we experience certain things throughout the day just from what society puts on us. And just reminding that we have that power is super, I don't know, freeing, I guess. It's awesome. So we get it. It sucks. Grief sucks. Now what do we do? So now we're going to talk about some things to do as a person who is supporting a person in grief. Um, so the first thing is just to show up, to listen, to be next to this person, to be in silence. Whatever is needed, that's what we do. Sometimes it might be getting a Chipotle burrito, going to the park, sitting in the sun, I don't know, listening to the rain, whatever it is. Find out what showing up means for your person and that person who's in front of you by asking them directly. It's okay to ask, what do you need right now? What what can I do to show up for you? Reach out in their darkness. Again, don't run to the light.
Um, and so, okay, so now you've shown up. You're like there, and you're like, okay, now I'm sitting in this park, or I have this dang Chipotle burrito. What next? A lot of that is listening, nodding, and validating. There's no correct way to go through the messiness that is grief. Um, Challenge yourself to not offer advice. Um, Give yourself a little bit perspective, um, because grief needs to be witnessed. It doesn't need to have a silver lining. And that's the biggest thing is you're offering that witnessing. You're not offering the, well, it's going to be okay. Try to steer clear of these trite, like, it gets better things. Like, it gets better campaign was great and doesn't super hit home when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
It needs to be witnessed in how hard this is right now. So this is a place for your person, not you. And we know that's hard. And you can do that. If so, that's coming later. One sec.
So, another thing would be recognizing that comparing grief is not helpful. Oftentimes, especially when we're reaching to turn on that light, we want to say, "Oh, I've been here. I know what it feels like. This is what I felt like. This is what, this is what you might experience, blah, blah, blah," rushing to help this person. Yes, there are folks who have experienced terrible things, and oftentimes we want to share those things that we've experienced. But remembering that the worst loss is your loss, so that person, that goes for that person too. So the worst loss is their loss. And again, just being present with them in the moment and not trying to offer that kind of reach or float in that sea of grief is sometimes better than, doing that. One of the resources we're going to offer up later is actually a podcast, and one of the experts that's on there talks a lot about grief, and it's awesome. But he basically said, his name is David Kessler, basically says we all grieve differently, right? And allowing someone to grieve exactly how they need to grieve is the most important thing. Once we start judging how they grieve, or thinking in our heads, oh, they should not be crying over this still, it's been 3 weeks or whatever, we're automatically like adding that judgment, and which encourage like almost a punishment to the other person for how they're grieving, which is the last thing we want to do, and even the last thing we intend to do in that situation.
So also throughout that, I is remember the fact that like you're also a human. Like the first three things was okay, focus on this person in front of you, focus on this person in front of you. And to be able to do that, know where you are. Oh my goodness, right? Um, so take mental note of your own discomfort, that flinch towards the light, and stay intentional about not moving out of this anxious place, this stressed place, this almost traumatic space, right? It's a possibility that as much as you want to be this ally, as much as you want to show up, it's triggering for you to show up. This is not a place for you to fix or to feel better. It's for you to show up. And so if you cannot do that, be real with it and say, this is a place where I can't show up. I would really love to. And I need to make sure that I'm okay. This can help make sure that you don't minimize the person going through it and their experience and their feelings, but also make sure that you aren't burning yourself out and retriggering yourself through in service of someone else. So sometimes boundaries and not showing up is also the answer.
Mm, I love that. Um, I wanted to add something to um, a kind of like around, finding meaning after this grief. So, you know, hopefully we get around the bend and we kind of feel better. We feel more comfortable in the grief that we have. Um, and it's important to recognize that. So it's important to, move through that experience and as a supporter, move through that experience however that person needs. Feel your grief, but also recognize that there comes gratitude at the end, right? And it's not gratitude for what happened, right? So it's not gratitude for losing that person. It's just finding gratitude in the meaning and like the importance of, okay, this is the process that I had to go through. And ultimately, I wouldn't like not want to know that person, especially if you lost someone you loved. Stuff like that. So really, getting comfortable with that gratitude also again comes with the whole showing up for ourselves and showing up for others. I just had to add that.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point of being able to say, like, there's gratitude at the end. It doesn't diminish what you just experienced, though,
Right.
right? Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean I'm super grateful for, like, my own experience of, like, my dad dying. Not super
Yeah.
grateful for that, but what came out of it, I'm grateful for the up in community, the, connection to all of my other humans and myself through that. Didn't need
Mm-hmm.
that to happen, and wow, what a great opportunity to grow closer to other folks.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So shall we share resources,
Yes,
Eli?
you're not alone in darkness, I promise
Yeah.
that one. Um,
uh, Go ahead.
so, some great resources for allies in this was that, podcast that Taylor explained. It's by Brene Brown, so she has a podcast, you should look it up just in general, but the specific one, the specific episode that has really helped um, other folks, including myself, is the David Kessler one, spelled David and then Kessler on grief and finding meaning. He also has written a book about the stages of grief and what that has looked like through his career and his own personal life. Um, Also, not just in Columbus, this is for, I think, everywhere in the
Yeah.
US.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct? Which has been a really cool resource for clients. I personally have not showed up to one, but it sounds like a really fun experience. Is the dinner party? So you can look up thedinnerparty.org, and it's a potluck for people experiencing loss. And they're currently meeting virtually because there's a pandemic, but um, I have seen folks have dinner parties like in person too when there's not a pandemic.
Also, their website is just like really awesome. They have a
So
really like,
interesting.
yeah, it's like basically like you open up the page and it's like, hey, we lost someone. Let's talk about it. Stuff like that. So chill, so cool. I love it. Um, and then I also wanted to share like an actual kind of social media page. So at the grief case, not briefcase, grief case. But it's a really cool Instagram page. And actually, they take input from people who have experienced loss. So, like, they have submission dates and stuff where you can submit, your story of grief. And That's really awesome for community. And even if you just, introvert like me, don't really want to be around a lot of people all the time, you can just sit and read this and still kind of be with others. So, yeah,
And remember that grief does not have to look like anyone else's. It
right.
is what you define.
hmm Thank you. um, I can share the next one
Yeah,
if you
go
want.
for it.
So more local to Columbus, the Cornerstone of Hope. They are again located in Columbus. They are founded on religious bases, but I do know some clients who went and also identify as queer, and they actually really enjoyed it, got a lot out of it. It's not one of those things where you'll hear a prayer every time or something if that's not your thing. So you can still go and just be with others and kind of process your loss. So important too. So we wanted to also give some resources in case you are in crisis. So in case you are feeling super not safe, super not good, contemplating suicide, self-harm, we wanted to still give out these resources for you in case you need them. So first one is obviously NetCare, located in Columbus. This is a line you can call any time of the day to talk to someone, and they are all trained. So this is what they do. Um, so that's a really great resource. And then another one that is less of a crisis line, but more of a hey, I just want to be with someone and not be alone. It's actually the Cincinnati Warm Line. So the Cincinnati Warm Line, you can still use it if you're not in Cincinnati. Um, you can just give them a call. Also, another trained professional will answer, and they can just process with you, be with you, kind of walk you through things if that's what you need. So, again, more of just being with another human for that number. So, yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. There we go. Um, we hope that this was helpful. If you do have any questions, feel free to look us up on the Equitas Health website. Our emails are there, and hopefully there can be an end thing with our emails as well,
Yeah.
if you have any questions. But good luck. Remember to listen to yourself, and give
hmm
yourself and your humans some grace.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks everyone for watching. And yeah, reach out if you need anything. Just remember to be human. We're all human. So, yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.